Madagascar should not exist. Not like this. When this island broke away from Africa 165 million years ago, it took a fragment of the ancient world with it, a piece of Gondwana, a remnant of the supercontinent that once held every landmass on Earth together. And then, the ocean closed in. 400 kilometers of open water, a barrier nothing could cross. The animals trapped on this island were stranded, cut off from the rest of the world, isolated in a way few places have ever been. They should have struggled. They should have competed for limited resources. They should have gone extinct as their relatives did everywhere else on Earth. But they didn't. Instead, something impossible happened. Today, 90% of the species on Madagascar are found nowhere else on Earth. Not in Africa, 400 kilometers away. Not in Asia, not anywhere. 90%. Think about that for a moment. 9 out of every 10 plants, animals, insects, reptiles, and amphibians on this island exist nowhere else in the universe. If they disappear here, they disappear forever. Lemurs that should have gone extinct 50 million years ago, thriving in 100 different forms. Trees that grow upside down and live for 1,000 years. Predators that look exactly like cats, but aren't cats at all. Frogs that can't swim. Moths the size of dinner plates. Chameleons smaller than your fingernail. An entire island where evolution stopped following the usual rules and somehow created one of the most successful ecosystems on the planet. This is Madagascar. 5% of the world's biodiversity packed into 0.4% of Earth's land surface. Scientists call it the 8th continent, a living laboratory, a biological treasure box, a time capsule where species that vanished everywhere else still survive. But here's what scientists couldn't explain for decades. Why did isolation make Madagascar's animals more diverse, not less? Why did the weakest survivors, the ones left behind when the continent split, become the most successful? And how does an island with some of the poorest soil on Earth support such an explosion of life? Tonight, we're going to discover why Madagascar is the strangest place on Earth. We'll journey back 165 million years to watch this island break away. We'll meet the creatures that rafted across impossible oceans, and we'll walk through forests where evolution took a completely different path. Close your eyes, let your breathing slow. Welcome to Rest with the Wild. If this journey brings you peace or keeps you awake with wonder, consider subscribing. Tonight, we travel to the island evolution forgot. The story of Madagascar begins not on an island, but on a supercontinent. 200 million years ago, there was no Indian Ocean, no Atlantic, no separate continents drifting through separate seas. There was only Gondwana, a massive landmass that held what we now call South America, Africa, India, Antarctica, Australia, and Madagascar locked together as one. If you could stand on this ancient supercontinent, you'd see landscapes that spanned from pole to pole, deserts the size of modern continents, mountain ranges that made the Himalayas look small, rivers that flowed for thousands of kilometers without ever reaching an ocean, and the animals. Dinosaurs roamed freely from what would become Brazil to what would become South Africa to what would become India. Early mammals, small, nervous creatures living in the shadows of reptilian giants, spread across the entire southern hemisphere without ever encountering an ocean barrier. This was a connected world, a unified world. What evolved in one place could walk to anywhere else. But beneath the surface, powerful forces were at work. The Earth's crust wasn't solid. It floated on a layer of molten rock, broken into massive plates that ground against each other, pulled apart, collided, and Gondwana sat atop several of these plates, each one moving in a slightly different direction. The supercontinent was tearing itself apart. The first crack appeared about 180 million years ago. splitting Africa from South America. The Atlantic Ocean was born, just a narrow gap at first, widening by centimeters each year. Dinosaurs that once walked freely between continents found themselves separated by water. Populations that had been unified began to diverge. Then, 165 million years ago, another rift opened. This one ran along the eastern edge of Africa, separating a chunk of land that would become Madagascar and India. The Mozambique Channel formed. 400 kilometers of ocean, deeper than mountains are tall, filled the gap. Madagascar was adrift. At first, it wasn't alone. India remained attached, the two land masses drifting together like a raft across the ancient ocean. The animals on this raft continued to evolve together, isolated from Africa, but not from each other. But 88 million years ago, a second split occurred. India broke away from Madagascar, continuing its northward journey toward Asia. It would eventually collide with the Asian continent, pushing up the Himalayas in one of the most violent geological events in Earth's history. Madagascar was left behind, alone in the Indian Ocean. No land connections, no bridges, no way for animals to walk to or from anywhere else on Earth. This isolation was total, and it changed everything. Scientists couldn't explain for a long time why Madagascar's animals looked so different from their African relatives just 400 kilometers away. The distance wasn't that far. Birds could fly it. Why couldn't evolution follow similar paths on both sides? The answer lies in what didn't make it to Madagascar. When the island split from the mainland, it took with it a random sample of Gondwanan life. Some groups of animals made the cut, most didn't. And once the ocean barrier formed, nothing new could arrive. No monkeys ever reached Madagascar, no apes, no big cats, no elephants, no antelopes, no giraffes. The entire roster of animals we associate with African wildlife, almost none of them made it to the island. What did make it? A strange, almost random collection of creatures, ancient primates called lemurs, small carnivores related to mongooses, a few species of rodents, some reptiles, amphibians, insects, and birds, of course, which could fly the gap. That was it. A skeleton crew of Gondwanan survivors, stranded on an island the size of France, with no new arrivals for millions of years. In most places, this would be a disaster. Limited genetic diversity, small populations, high risk of extinction. Every ecology textbook will tell you that isolated islands lose species faster than they gain them. But Madagascar did the opposite. Those few stranded species exploded into hundreds. The lemurs, probably just a handful of individuals when the split occurred, diversified into more than 100 species. The mongoose-like carnivores evolved into the fossa, a predator that looks and hunts exactly like a cat, despite being more closely related to a meerkat. The rodents spread into every habitat, from rainforests to deserts to high-altitude plateaus. Why? Because every ecological niche was empty. On the African mainland, lemurs faced competition from monkeys, apes, and other primates. They faced predation from leopards, lions, and hyenas. They struggled for food against baboons and colobus monkeys and dozens of other species. On Madagascar, they faced nothing. No competition, no predators except what evolved alongside them. An entire island of opportunities with no one to claim them. So the lemurs spread. Some became nocturnal, feeding on insects and tree sap. Others stayed diurnal, eating leaves and fruit. Some grew large, reaching 10 kilograms. Others stayed tiny, weighing less than an ounce. Some developed specialized teeth for puncturing bark. Others evolved gut bacteria to digest toxic leaves. This is adaptive radiation, the process where one ancestor diversifies into many species, each filling a different niche. And on Madagascar, with no competition to slow them down, it happened faster and more completely than almost anywhere else on Earth. But here's the part that puzzled scientists for decades. How did the lemurs get to Madagascar in the first place? When Madagascar split from Africa, it took its original inhabitants with it. But lemurs weren't native to the Gondwanan fragment that became Madagascar. Fossil evidence shows they evolved in Africa millions of years after the split. So how did they cross 400 kilometers of open ocean? For a long time, no one knew. It seemed impossible. Lemurs can't swim that distance. They can't fly. There was no land bridge. The ocean floor is too deep for that. Every explanation seemed absurd. Until researchers proposed the rafting hypothesis. Imagine a massive storm hitting the east coast of Africa 50 million years ago. Rivers swell, flooding tiers, chunks of riverbank loose, huge mats of vegetation, soil and trees all tangled together. These rafts, some the size of a house, wash out to sea. Now imagine a small group of lemurs, maybe a pregnant female and a few juveniles, clinging to one of these rafts. They didn't choose to go on this journey. They're terrified, soaked, starving. The raft drifts for days, maybe weeks. Most occupants die. The odds of survival are minuscule, but ocean currents run from Africa toward Madagascar. If the raft doesn't break apart, if the animals don't die of thirst or starvation, if the currents carry them in exactly the right direction, they might make landfall. It sounds ridiculous. It sounds like the kind of just-so story scientists are trained to reject. Except DNA evidence proves it happened. Genetic analysis shows that all Madagascar's lemurs descend from a single colonization event. One raft, one group of survivors, probably fewer than 10 individuals. And from that tiny founder population, more than 100 species evolved. The odds of this happening successfully were absurdly low, which is why it probably only happened once or twice in Madagascar's entire history. The fossil's ancestors likely arrived the same way. Mongooses on a different raft, millions of years later. So did the rodents. So did some of the reptiles. Each successful crossing was a lottery win, a biological miracle, the kind of event that happens once in 10 million years. But when it did happen, when those few survivors made landfall on an island with no competition, they didn't just survive, they flourished. This is the paradox at the heart of Madagascar. The same isolation that made arrival nearly impossible made success almost guaranteed. The barrier that kept most species out protected the few that made it through. Madagascar wasn't just an island, it was an evolutionary laboratory with the doors locked from the outside. And for 65 million years, the experiments ran without interruption. The island itself was changing during this time. Tectonic forces didn't stop when Madagascar finished drifting. The land buckled, forming a spine of highlands running north to south down the center of the island. These highlands trapped moisture from the Indian Ocean, creating a rain shadow. The eastern slopes became rainforests, dense, wet, draped in mist. Annual rainfall reaches 4 meters in some areas. Rivers tumble down steep valleys. Waterfalls carve through ancient rock. The forest here looks lush, almost Amazonian, though the species are completely different. The western side became drier, deciduous forests that lose their leaves in the dry season. Baobab woodlands where massive trees dominate the landscape. Spiny forests in the south where plants evolved thorns instead of leaves to conserve water. And in the highlands, unique ecosystems developed. Montane forests where lemurs adapted to cold nights and thin air. Grasslands maintained by regular fires. Wetlands in valley floors. Each of these habitats became its own evolutionary theatre. Lemurs in the rainforest evolved different traits than lemurs in the dry west. The fossil's hunting strategies varied by terrain. Even the insects, the reptiles, the frogs, everything diverged. Isolation wasn't just between Madagascar and the rest of the world. It was between different parts of Madagascar itself. Rivers became barriers. Mountain ranges separated populations, and each isolated population evolved in its own direction. By the time humans arrived, just 2,000 years ago, Madagascar had become the most biodiverse island on Earth. 90% endemism, 15,000 plant species, 12,000 of them found nowhere else. 100 lemur species, 346 amphibian species, nearly all unique, chameleons of every size and color, birds that existed in forms found nowhere else. An entire world compressed onto an island the size of Texas, built from the scattered survivors of ancient rafting events. Deep in the western dry forest, as the last light fades, a female fossa emerges from her den. She's 4 years old, 45 kilograms of muscle and reflex. Her coat is reddish-brown, sleek, built for moving through dense vegetation. She looks like a cat, narrow face, retractable claws, fluid movements. But her lineage traces back not to cats, but to mongooses that rafted here millions of years ago. Convergent evolution shaped her ancestors into the island's apex predator. She stretches. Her territory spans 15 square kilometers of dry, deciduous forest. The trees here lose their leaves in winter, opening the canopy, making hunting easier. She knows every trail, every water source, every spot where lemurs come to drink. Tonight, she's hungry. It's been 3 days since her last meal. Her ribs show slightly beneath her fur. She can afford to wait another day, maybe 2, but no longer. She begins her patrol, scent marking boundary trees as she moves. The forest is quiet, too quiet. The lemur troops should be settling into their sleeping trees by now, calling to each other, establishing positions. But something has disturbed them. They're silent, hidden, watching. She continues deeper into her territory, patient. Hunting is always a waiting game, and somewhere above her, in a massive baobab that has stood for 1,200 years, another resident of this forest prepares for night. The tree is enormous. Its trunk is 15 meters around, thick enough to house several cars inside if it were hollow. It isn't hollow, but it is porous, filled with spongy tissue that stores water like a living cistern. 120,000 liters during the rainy season, enough to survive 9 months of drought. In its crown, 50 meters above the ground, a troop of Vero's sifakas has gathered. 15 individuals, mostly females and juveniles. They've chosen this tree for sleeping because its smooth bark makes climbing difficult for fossas. They're safe here. Probably. The largest female, the matriarch, scans the forest floor one more time before settling. She doesn't see the fossa, but she knows predators hunt at night. Her troop's survival depends on choosing the right trees, staying alert, never assuming safety. She gathers her infant close. The young one is 4 months old, clinging to her chest. It will stay with her for another year, learning which trees are safe, which routes through the canopy avoid danger, where to find food when the dry season comes. The sun drops below the horizon. The forest shifts from day to night. And in that transition, thousands of species adjust their behavior. Some sleep, others wake. The island's ecosystems operate in layers, in shifts, in carefully evolved rhythms that keep the engine running 24 hours a day. Madagascar doesn't rest. It changes forms. The geological story of Madagascar explains the how the island split, how animals arrived, how isolation created opportunity, but it doesn't fully explain the why. Why did this particular combination of factors produce such extreme biodiversity? Scientists debate this still. Some argue it's the island's size, large enough to support diverse habitats, small enough that populations remained connected. Others point to the climate stability. Madagascar never glaciated, never experienced the mass extinctions that reset evolution elsewhere. Still others suggest it's the timing. Madagascar isolated itself exactly when mammals were beginning to diversify globally. The lemurs that rafted here arrived at the perfect evolutionary moment, after the dinosaurs' extinction opened new niches, before more advanced primates filled them. Or maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe Madagascar succeeded because it failed to be accessible. The barrier that kept most species out also kept Madagascar's species in. They couldn't leave. They couldn't be replaced. They had to adapt or die, and so they adapted. For 65 million years, without interruption, without invasion, without the reset button that land bridges provide, they became something unique, something irreplaceable, an island where evolution forgot the rules everyone else was following, and in forgetting, created something no one could have predicted. The night deepens. The fossa continues her patrol, the sifakas sleep in their safe tree, and the ancient baobab stands, as it has for 12 centuries, storing water, providing shelter, marking time in growth rings that will outlast human civilizations. Tomorrow, the sun will rise. The day shift will take over from the night shift. The forest will continue its ancient rhythms. But tonight, in the darkness, Madagascar's true nature reveals itself. Not the island tourists see in daylight, but the working ecosystem that operates when human eyes aren't watching. The island that shouldn't exist, doing what it does best, surviving, against all odds, against isolation, against time itself. For millions of years, Madagascar existed without human eyes to witness it. The lemurs leaped through forests no one named. The fossas hunted prey no one counted. The baobabs grew for centuries with no one to marvel at their age. And then, about 2,000 years ago, boats appeared on the horizon. The first people to reach Madagascar didn't come from the obvious place. Africa sat just 400 kilometers to the west, a short journey by ancient standards. But the first humans to settle this island came from 5,000 kilometers away, across the Indian Ocean, from what is now Indonesia and Malaysia. They were Austronesian seafarers, descendants of the same maritime cultures that colonized Polynesia, the Philippines, and countless Pacific islands. Why they sailed west instead of east, why they ended up in Madagascar instead of continuing around Africa, remains unclear. But they came, and they brought with them everything needed to establish a new civilization. Rice cultivation, outrigger canoes, a language that would evolve into modern Malagasy, and domestic animals including cattle and chickens. What they found when they landed was unlike anywhere else they'd been. Forests full of animals they'd never seen. Lemurs of every size, from mouse-sized nocturnal foragers to gorilla-sized diurnal herbivores. Giant elephant birds, relatives of ostriches, standing 3 meters tall and laying eggs the size of soccer balls. Massive tortoises, and a forest full of plants that existed nowhere in their ancestral homelands. For these first settlers, Madagascar must have seemed like a different planet. They adapted quickly. Within centuries, they'd established villages along the coasts and in the highlands. They cleared forests for rice paddies. They hunted for food, and they began the process, unintentional at first, deliberate later, of reshaping the island's ecosystems. The megafauna disappeared first. The elephant birds, slow and ground-dwelling, made easy targets. Within a few hundred years of human arrival, they were extinct. So were the giant lemurs, some species weighing over 200 kilograms, too large and too slow to escape hunters. The giant tortoises vanished. The hippopotamus-like creatures that grazed in Madagascar's wetlands disappeared. Scientists still debate how much was hunting versus habitat loss versus climate change. But the timing is clear. Humans arrived 2,000 years ago, and within 500 years, Madagascar's largest animals were gone. The survivors were the small, the fast, and the nocturnal, lemurs that stayed in trees, fossors that avoided humans, reptiles and amphibians that hid during the day. These species had evolved without human predation, without experience of tool-using hunters. Those that couldn't adapt quickly enough didn't survive, but those that did survive found themselves in a changed world, a world where humans were now the dominant force, reshaping landscapes, burning forests, introducing new species from their homelands. Doom. Over the following centuries, Madagascar's human population grew and diversified. Bantu-speaking peoples from East Africa crossed the Mozambique Channel, adding their genetic and cultural influence. Arab traders established ports along the northwest coast. Different ethnic groups developed distinct identities: the Merina of the highlands, the Betsimisaraka of the east coast, the Sakalava of the west, the Antandroi of the arid south. Each group developed their own relationship with the land. Some cleared forests aggressively for rice cultivation. Others practiced a slash-and-burn technique called tavi, cutting a patch of forest, burning it, planting crops for a few years, then moving on to let the forest regrow. Some groups revered certain lemur species as ancestors, protecting them under sacred taboos called fadi. Others hunted lemurs freely for food. These varied traditions created a complex patchwork of conservation and destruction. A forest might be protected in one valley because it held ancestral burial grounds, while the forest in the next valley was cleared without restriction. Certain species survived in one region because of local fadi, while their populations crashed elsewhere. This cultural complexity would later complicate conservation efforts, but it also created accidental refuges where some species survived that might otherwise have disappeared entirely. For more than 1,000 years, Madagascar remained unknown to the wider world. European maps showed the African coast in detail, marked trade routes across the Indian Ocean to India and Southeast Asia, but Madagascar remained blank space, terra incognita, a ghost island that sailors occasionally glimpsed but rarely landed on. That changed in 1500 when Portuguese explorer Diogo Dias became the first European to sight the island. His ships, blown off course during a voyage to India, found themselves approaching an unfamiliar coastline. He named it São Lourenço, after the saint's day they arrived. The Portuguese didn't establish colonies immediately. Madagascar was off the main trade routes, difficult to access, and rumoured to be dangerous. But they began marking it on maps, and other Europeans started to take notice. By the 1600s, Madagascar had gained a different kind of fame. It became a pirate haven. European pirates raiding merchant ships in the Indian Ocean needed bases where no government could reach them. Madagascar's remote bays and harbours, far from colonial authorities, proved perfect. Pirates established settlements, took local wives, created hybrid communities that blended European and Malagasy cultures. Some pirates grew wealthy enough to establish small kingdoms. Others died of tropical diseases or in conflicts with local rulers. Their impact on Madagascar was minimal compared to what indigenous peoples had already done, but their presence attracted European attention. And with that attention came the first scientific descriptions of Madagascar's unique wildlife. In the early 1800s, European naturalists began visiting Madagascar specifically to study its biology. What they found astonished them. Lemurs existed nowhere else on Earth. Not in Africa, not in Asia, only here. Why? How had they gotten here? Why hadn't they spread elsewhere? The fossors looked like cats, hunted like cats, filled the ecological role of cats. But dissection revealed they weren't cats at all. They were more closely related to mongooses. How had they evolved to look so similar to animals they'd never encountered? The plants were equally baffling. Baobabs that resembled African species, but were genetically distinct. Orchids found nowhere else. Palms unique to the island. Everything familiar, yet foreign. Naturalists collected specimens by the thousands, shipping them back to European museums and botanical gardens. They describe new species at an astonishing rate. Hundreds, then thousands of plants, animals, insects, reptiles. Each discovery raised new questions about how this island had become so different from everywhere else. Alfred Russel Wallace, the co-discoverer of natural selection alongside Charles Darwin, recognized Madagascar's significance immediately. He called it one of the most important places on Earth for understanding evolution. Here was an island where isolation had created an entire evolutionary experiment, running for millions of years without interference. But Wallace couldn't explain how the lemurs had arrived. Continental drift hadn't been discovered yet. The idea that continents moved, that Madagascar had once been connected to Africa and India, seemed absurd. So naturalists were left with an impossible puzzle. An island full of animals that couldn't have walked there, couldn't have swum there, but somehow existed there in forms found nowhere else. The rafting hypothesis, the idea that animals crossed on floating vegetation, was proposed but widely mocked. It seemed too improbable, too lucky. Evolution was supposed to be gradual, predictable, not dependent on absurd chances like animals floating across oceans. It would take another century before DNA evidence proved the mockers wrong. In the late 1900s and early 2000s, molecular biology revolutionized our understanding of Madagascar's history. Scientists could now compare DNA between species, measuring genetic differences to estimate when populations split from each other. The results were stunning. All of Madagascar's lemurs, more than 100 species, descended from a single common ancestor, one colonization event. DNA evidence dated it to approximately 50 to 60 million years ago, long after Madagascar had separated from Africa. The lemurs hadn't been on the island when it split. They'd arrived later by ocean crossing. The odds of this happening successfully were calculated at roughly 1 in a million, and yet it had happened, probably just once. The Fossas' ancestors made a similar journey, though millions of years later. DNA showed they descended from mongoose-like carnivores that rafted from Africa. Again, probably a single successful crossing. Some of Madagascar's rodents arrived the same way. So did certain reptiles. Each crossing was a biological lottery win. But when those few survivors landed on an island with no competition, they didn't just persist, they exploded into diversity. This pattern revealed something profound about evolution. It's not always gradual. It's not always predictable. Sometimes it depends on absurdly unlikely events. A storm at exactly the right time, currents flowing in exactly the right direction, a pregnant female among the survivors. And when those 1,000,000-to-1 chances come through, they can reshape entire ecosystems. Madagascar exists because of luck. Repeated, impossible luck, stretched across millions of years. Modern research continues to reveal new surprises. In the last 20 years alone, scientists have described dozens of new lemur species. Some were hiding in remote forests no one had thoroughly explored. Others were thought to be color variations of known species until DNA revealed they were distinct. New frogs are discovered almost annually, new chameleons, new geckos. Even new mammals occasionally appear. A species of mongoose-like carnivore, previously unknown, photographed by camera traps in 2016. Each discovery raises the same question. What else is out there? Still undocumented, still unknown. And each discovery also raises urgency. Will we find these species before their habitats disappear? High in a dead tree near the baobab grove, a male aye emerges from his daytime shelter. He's 6 years old, weighs just over 2 kilograms. His fur is coarse, almost black, with a layer of white guard hairs that give him a grizzled appearance. His eyes are enormous, adaptations for nocturnal vision, glowing orange in the last light of dusk. But his most distinctive feature is his hands, specifically his middle fingers, elongated to twice the length of his other digits, looking almost skeletal. These fingers are tools. Precision instruments evolved for a very specific purpose. He begins his nightly foraging routine by moving to a dead tree branch. He taps it with his elongated finger. Tap, 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 tap. Rapid percussion, listening intently. The sound reverberates through the wood. If the branch is solid, the sound is dull, consistent. If there's a hollow chamber inside, a tunnel carved by beetle larvae, the sound changes. Higher pitch, slight echo. There. He hears it. A cavity, maybe 3 centimeters below the bark. He gnaws through the wood with his powerful front teeth, opening the tunnel. Then he inserts his middle finger, probing deep into the chamber. He feels movement. The finger hooks something soft. He withdraws it, pulling out a fat grub. He's found a technique that took millions of years to evolve. On other continents, woodpeckers fill this niche, pecking through bark, extracting insects with long tongues. But Madagascar has no woodpeckers. The niche was empty when lemurs arrived, so one lineage of lemurs evolved to fill it, developing elongated fingers instead of elongated tongues. Convergent evolution, taking a completely different path to the same solution. The eye continues foraging, moving through the dead trees with practiced efficiency. He'll spend most of the night like this, tapping, listening, extracting grubs. It's solitary work. Eyes don't form troops like other lemurs. They hunt alone, covering large territories, rarely encountering their own kind except during breeding season. This solitary nature has helped them survive human arrival. They're hard to find, hard to observe, active only at night, but it hasn't protected them from superstition. In many Malagasy cultures, the eye is considered an omen of death. Folklore says that if an eye points its elongated finger at you, you'll die within the year. The rational explanation is simple. The eye uses its finger to forage and points it at anything that interests it, including humans. But fear doesn't respond to rational explanations. Villagers who encounter eyes sometimes kill them on sight, believing this prevents the curse. Conservation workers have tried education campaigns, explaining the eye's behavior, its ecological importance. Some communities have embraced protection, others maintain the old fears. The eye doesn't know any of this, of course. He just forages, moving through his territory, tapping trees, extracting grubs, surviving another night in a forest that grows smaller every year. Meanwhile, deeper in the forest, the female fossa has picked up a scent trail. Lemurs, a troop of Veros sifakas. They passed through here within the last hour, moving from their daytime feeding grounds toward their sleeping tree. She can smell them, the distinctive musk lemurs use for scent marking, mixed with the smell of the leaves they've been eating. She follows the trail patiently. Fossas can run fast in short bursts, but they're ambush predators, not pursuit hunters. Success comes from knowing where prey will be, not from chasing them down. The trail leads toward a grove of large baobabs near a seasonal stream. The lemurs often sleep there. The trees are tall, with smooth bark that makes climbing difficult. Safe if you're a lemur trying to avoid fossas. But lemurs have to drink, and when they do, they come down to the ground. That's when they're vulnerable. She settles into a hidden position, downwind of the stream, where overhanging roots create shadows deep enough to conceal her. Then she waits. Fossas can wait for hours without moving, absolutely motionless, only their eyes tracking movement. Hunting isn't guaranteed. She might wait all night, and the lemurs might not come down. They might sense her presence and stay in the safety of the canopy. Or they might come down at a spot too far away for her to reach before they escape. But waiting is part of being a predator. Patience is survival. Above her, in the baobab, the Sifaka troop has already settled for the night. They don't know she's there, not yet. But they'll be cautious when they descend at dawn to drink. They always are. The forest settles into night rhythms. Diurnal animals sleep. Nocturnal animals wake. The boundaries between day and night shift overlap, create a world where both exist simultaneously. And in that twilight zone, Madagascar's true character emerges. Not the tourist-friendly version visitors see in daylight, but the working ecosystem that operates when human observers aren't watching. An island where evolution forgot the usual rules and created something entirely its own. The fossa waits, the eye forages, and the ancient baobab stands witness to another night, one of millions it has seen, storing water, providing shelter, marking time in ways humans can barely comprehend. The forest continues, as it has for millions of years, as it might for millions more, if the forests survive, if the species persist, if the island's impossible luck holds just a little longer. Every culture that has lived on Madagascar has tried to explain what they see. The trees that seem to grow upside down, the animals that exist nowhere else, the forests that feel older than memory. And like all human cultures encountering the inexplicable, they created stories. These aren't just folklore. They're not primitive superstitions waiting to be corrected by science. They're sophisticated explanations for genuine mysteries, encoded in narrative form, passed down through generations, shaping how people interact with the forest. Some of these stories protect species, others endanger them. Some create sanctuaries, others justify exploitation. The relationship between belief and conservation in Madagascar is complicated, contradictory, and absolutely critical to understanding why some species survive while others disappear. Let's start with the most visible symbol of Madagascar's strangeness: the baobab trees. If you've seen photographs of Madagascar, you've almost certainly seen baobabs. They're impossible to mistake for anything else. Massive trunks, sometimes 15 meters in diameter, swelling out like enormous bottles. Branches that spread at the top in a tangle that looks nothing like normal tree architecture. And during the dry season, when the leaves fall, those branches look disturbingly like roots reaching into the sky. It's as if someone pulled the tree out of the ground, flipped it upside down, and replanted it with its roots in the air. The Malagasy peoples noticed this long before scientists arrived, and they had an explanation. According to one widespread myth, the baobab was once the most beautiful tree in creation. Its flowers were the most fragrant, its fruit the most delicious, its shade the most cooling. But the tree grew vain. It began to boast about its superiority, looking down on other plants, refusing to acknowledge the role of rain, soil, and sun in its success. The gods, or God, depending on which version of the story you hear, grew tired of the baobab's arrogance. As punishment, they ripped it from the earth and thrust it back into the ground upside down. The roots became branches. The tree could no longer see its own beauty reflected in water. It stood humiliated, a warning against pride. The baobab accepted its punishment. It learned humility, and the gods, seeing this acceptance, allowed it to continue living. That's why baobabs grow so old, why they survive drought and fire and cyclones. They endured their punishment with grace and were rewarded with longevity. It's a beautiful story, and like many myths, it contains ecological truth wrapped in moral teaching. Baobabs do look upside down because of how they've adapted to Madagascar's climate. The massive trunk stores water, up to 120,000 litres in the largest individuals. During the 9-month dry season, when other trees are dormant or dead, the baobab draws on this internal reservoir. The strange branching pattern minimises surface area, reducing water loss through leaves. The tree's punishment is actually a survival strategy that took millions of years to evolve. But the myth encodes an important observation. These trees are different. They follow different rules. They survive conditions that kill other trees. Respect them, and people did respect them. In many regions, cutting a baobab was forbidden, not because of explicit conservation laws, but because of sacred status. Some baobabs were considered dwelling places for ancestors' spirits. Others were used as gathering places for important decisions. Their fruit was harvested, their bark used for rope, but the trees themselves remained protected. This protection through sacredness has saved some of Madagascar's oldest baobabs. Trees that have stood for over 1,000 years survived because people believed they were more than just wood. They were living connections to the past, witnesses to history, too important to destroy for short-term gain. But not all baobabs are protected. Sacred status varies by region, by clan, by individual tree. Some of the most magnificent baobabs in Madagascar have been cut down in recent years for land clearing, despite protests from conservationists and traditional elders. The tension between economic need and cultural protection remains unresolved. If the baobab represents Madagascar's most visible strangeness, the aye represents its most dangerous. In many Malagasy communities, the aye is not just feared, it's considered an omen of death. The specific beliefs vary. Some say that if an aye points its long finger at you, someone in your family will die within the year. Others say the aye is a spirit creature that marks houses where death will visit. Some believe killing an aye prevents the curse. Others say killing one guarantees it. The result is the same. The aye is persecuted. Villagers who find one near their homes often kill it immediately. Bodies are sometimes displayed as warnings. The fear runs deep, passed from parents to children, reinforced by occasional coincidences where someone did die after an aye sighting, confirming the belief. Conservation workers face an impossible dilemma. The aye is critically endangered. Habitat loss is part of the problem, but so is direct killing motivated by superstition. Education campaigns explaining that ayes are harmless, that their finger pointing is just foraging behavior, have had mixed results. Some communities have embraced aye protection. They've learned the ecological role these animals play, controlling insect populations, particularly beetles that damage trees. They've come to see ayes as beneficial, even interesting. Ecotourism has helped. Villages near aye populations can earn money from tourists wanting to see these rare creatures. But other communities maintain the old beliefs, and conservation workers must navigate carefully. Dismissing someone's deeply held cultural beliefs as superstition doesn't change minds. It breeds resentment, makes people less likely to cooperate with conservation efforts. The most successful approaches acknowledge the fear while providing alternative interpretations. Yes, ayes appear when death is near, but perhaps they're warning you, not causing the death. Perhaps they're messengers trying to help. Perhaps showing them respect rather than killing them is the proper response. It's delicate work. Changing cultural beliefs takes generations. The aye doesn't have generations. Current population estimates suggest fewer than 2,000 individuals remain in the wild. Everyone killed brings the species closer to extinction. The aye continues foraging, unaware of the weight of human belief surrounding it. To the aye, the elongated finger is just a tool for extracting grubs. It points at interesting things because that's what the finger does. Probes, explores, investigates. There's no malice, no curse, no supernatural power, just a highly specialized lemur filling a niche that woodpeckers fill elsewhere, surviving on dead trees and beetle larvae, doing what its ancestors have done for millions of years. Whether that's enough to ensure its survival depends not on biology, but on whether human beliefs can shift fast enough to protect it. The relationship between Malagasy peoples and lemurs in general is even more complicated than the aye situation. Some lemur species are considered sacred. The Indri, largest of the living lemurs, famous for its haunting wailing calls, is protected in many regions by fady, traditional taboos that forbid hunting or harming them. The reasons vary. Some groups believe the Indri are ancestors who were transformed into lemurs but retained human souls. Others say the Indri helped humans in ancient times and must be repaid with protection. The result is that in areas where Indri are sacred, they're remarkably tame. They don't flee humans. They allow close approach. They seem to understand at some level that in this place they're safe, but travel 200 kilometers to a different region where different fady apply, and Indri are hunted for bushmeat. The same species treated completely differently, based solely on which cultural tradition governs that particular forest. Sifakas, the lemurs currently sleeping in the baobab near where the fossa waits, have similarly variable status. In some areas, they're protected ancestors. In others, they're acceptable food. The distinction isn't arbitrary. It follows clan lineages, historical events, specific stories about particular groups' relationships with particular species. This creates a conservation nightmare. You can't create a unified protection plan when the same species is revered in one valley and hunted in the next. Education campaigns that work in one community offend another. Laws that ban lemur hunting conflict with traditional practices that have existed for centuries. Yet this same complexity has also created accidental sanctuaries, sacred forests, areas forbidden to enter because they hold ancestral burial grounds or spiritual significance, have protected biodiversity even as surrounding forests were cleared. Some of these sacred forests are tiny, just a few hectares. Others span square kilometers. Together, they form a network of refuges where species survive that might otherwise have been eliminated. Modern conservation efforts increasingly work with traditional authorities rather than against them. Instead of imposing Western conservation models, they partner with village elders, respect fady systems, find ways to align traditional beliefs with species protection. It's not perfect. Beliefs change. Young people often don't hold fady as strongly as their grandparents did. Economic pressure can overwhelm traditional restraints. Hungry people hunt lemurs regardless of taboos. And climate change, deforestation, and habitat loss affect sacred and non-sacred forests alike. But the partnership between traditional belief and modern conservation remains Madagascar's best hope for protecting species that exist nowhere else on Earth. Back in his dead tree, the Ai has found another grub chamber. He taps, listens, gnaws through bark, inserts his skeletal finger, extracts his prey. The routine is automatic now, refined through millions of repetitions over 6 years of life. He doesn't know that in a village 5 kilometers from here, people tell stories about creatures like him. He doesn't know that some humans would kill him on sight while others would protect him. He just forages, moving through his territory, exploiting a niche that exists only because Madagascar evolved in isolation. His elongated finger, the source of so much human fear, is one of evolution's most elegant solutions. A tool that required no hands to craft, no knowledge to use. Just millions of years of natural selection favoring individuals whose fingers reach slightly deeper into insect tunnels. It's neither curse nor blessing. It's adaptation. Pure, functional, beautiful in its specificity. Whether humans choose to see it that way determines whether the Ai has a future. As dawn approaches, the baobab grove near the seasonal stream becomes active. The Sifaka troop in the great baobab's crown begins to stir. The matriarch wakes first, scanning the forest floor before moving. This is the dangerous time. Predators hunt at the boundaries between night and day, when nocturnal animals are exhausted and diurnal animals are still groggy. She can't see the fossa waiting in the shadows near the stream. The predator is too well concealed, too patient, too experienced. But the matriarch senses something, an absence of sound where sound should be. a quality to the pre-dawn air that suggests danger. She keeps her troop in the tree, waiting, watching. They're thirsty. The dry season is beginning, and they haven't drunk in 2 days. But thirst can wait. Death can't be postponed. Below, the fossa remains motionless. She's been in position for 6 hours now, completely still except for her eyes tracking movement. Her muscles are ready to explode into action, but she conserves energy, waiting for the perfect moment. This is the equation every predator faces: patience versus opportunity. Wait too long and the prey might never come. Strike too early and the prey escapes. The decision point is measured in fractions of seconds, and the difference between success and failure is often just timing. The sifacas wait. The fossa waits. And in this moment of tension, both species demonstrate the survival strategies that have kept them alive through millions of years of evolution. The sifacas caution is inherited from ancestors who learned that careless individuals don't reproduce. The fossa's patience is inherited from ancestors who learned that impulsive hunters starve. Neither animal thinks about evolution. They just do what feels right, what their instincts demand, what has worked for countless generations before them. The sky lightens, birds begin to call, the nocturnal shift ends and the diurnal shift begins. And in this transition, in this moment between dark and light, Madagascar's true nature reveals itself. Not a peaceful paradise, not a violent battlefield, just an ecosystem operating according to rules refined over millions of years, where predator and prey, hunter and hunted, exist in a balance so delicate that removing one species would collapse the entire system. The baobab tree itself has witnessed thousands of these dawn encounters. It has stood for 1,200 years, hosting countless animals, providing food and shelter, marking time in growth rings that tell stories scientists are only beginning to read. In traditional belief, ancient baobabs like this one are more than just trees. They're archives, memory keepers. Some groups believe that important knowledge is stored in these trees, not in wood, but in spirit. That elders' wisdom, when they die, enters the baobab and waits there for future generations to access through prayer or meditation. There's metaphorical truth in this. Ancient trees do hold knowledge encoded in their wood. Growth rings record climate patterns. Which years brought rain, which brought drought. Pollen embedded in their bark tells what other species live nearby. Insects dwelling in their hollows create ecosystems found nowhere else. The baobab doesn't know it's sacred. It doesn't know some humans would protect it while others would cut it down. It just grows, stores water, flowers when conditions are right, produces fruit that feeds lemurs and humans alike. Its survival strategy is simpler than consciousness. Be too large to kill easily, too useful to destroy thoughtlessly, too impressive to ignore, and hope that humans choose preservation over exploitation. So far, for this particular tree, that strategy has worked for 12 centuries. Whether it will work for 12 more depends on choices humans haven't made yet. The dawn fully breaks. The fossa, sensing the moment has passed, the lemurs too wary, too alert now, slips away into deeper forest. She'll try again tomorrow at a different location, with a different strategy. Fossas don't give up, they just adjust. The sifacas, after another 20 minutes of cautious watching, finally descend to drink. They move fast, staying alert, ready to flee at any sound. They lap water quickly, then bound back up into the safety of the canopy. The forest cycles continue. Predator and prey, fear and courage, survival measured in daily decisions, in moments of caution, in the space between hunger and safety. And the ancient baobab stands, witness to it all, storing water for the dry months ahead, preparing to flower when rain returns, persisting as it has for longer than human memory can reach. Madagascar breathes. The stories humans tell about it, myths, legends, scientific explanations, are all attempts to understand something that exists beyond full comprehension. An island where 90% of species evolved in isolation, where trees grow upside down and animals point fingers, where fear and reverence, destruction and protection exist side by side. The sun rises fully now, the night shift rests, the day shift takes over, and somewhere in the forest, an eye returns to his tree hollow. An exhausted fossa finds a shaded spot to sleep, and a 1,200-year-old baobab continues doing what it has always done, surviving, against odds, against time, against the weight of human beliefs and human needs. For now, the fossa is hungry now, 3 days without food. Her ribs show beneath her sleek coat, and her movements carry an edge of urgency she didn't have before. This morning's failed ambush at the stream means she needs to adjust her strategy. The sifakas in that territory are too cautious, too experienced with her hunting patterns. They've learned where she waits, which trees she uses for approach, which times of day she's most active. So she moves deeper into her territory, away from the baobab grove, toward a section of forest she visits less frequently. Here, a different lemur troop lives, Cockerel's sifakas, slightly larger than Varro's, with different daily routines. She knows this group less well. They know her less well. That inexperience might create an opening. She travels through the canopy. Fossas are excellent climbers, one of the few cat-like predators comfortable hunting in trees. Her flexible ankle joints allow her to descend head first, rotating her back feet backward to maintain grip. This adaptation, unique among Madagascar's carnivores, makes her as effective in the canopy as on the ground. By midday, she's reached the territory of the Cockerel's sifaka group. She finds a position in a dense tangle of branches overlooking one of their regular feeding trees, a large tamarind heavy with seed pods. The lemurs visit this tree almost daily during the dry season. The pods provide protein when other food sources are scarce. She settles in to wait. Again, hunting is always waiting, but this time, her body's urgency adds pressure. She can go another day, maybe 2, without eating. After that, she'll weaken. Weakened predators make mistakes. Mistakes lead to injury. Injury leads to starvation. The stakes are real now. Hours pass. The sun moves across the sky, harsh and bright. The dry season has begun in earnest. The deciduous trees around her are losing leaves, opening the canopy, making shadows scarce. Hiding becomes harder as the forest becomes more transparent, but it also makes hunting easier. Lemurs can't move through the canopy as easily when branches are bare. They become more visible, more exposed, more vulnerable. Late afternoon arrives. The heat begins to break. And finally, movement. A troop of 6 Cockerel's sifakas approaches the tamarind tree. They move cautiously. Lemurs are always cautious, but they haven't detected her. The wind is in her favor, carrying her scent away from them. She's downwind, concealed in shadow, motionless. They enter the tamarind crown and begin feeding. 1 adult male, 2 adult females, 3 juveniles. The male feeds highest, acting as sentinel. The females and juveniles work the lower branches, closer to where she waits. She identifies her target, a juvenile about 6 months old, feeding on a branch that extends away from the main trunk. If she can reach that branch before the juvenile notices, she'll be between it and the safety of the trunk. The juvenile will have to go past her to escape. She begins her approach, inch by inch, weight distributed across multiple branches to avoid vibration. Each movement takes 30 seconds. She covers 3 meters in 10 minutes. The juvenile is focused on feeding, cracking seed pods, consuming the flesh inside. It doesn't look up, doesn't sense danger. 2 meters now. The male sentinel is looking the other direction, scanning the forest floor for ground-based threats. He doesn't expect danger from the canopy. 1 meter. The fossa's muscles coil. Her weight shifts to her hindquarters. Every nerve fires in preparation. And then, a bird alarm calls. Not because of her. Something else in the forest, a harrier hawk maybe, has startled a flock of smaller birds. They explode into flight, calling warnings. The male sifaka reacts instantly. He barks alarm, a sharp coughing sound. The entire troop freezes, then bolts. The juvenile leaps for the trunk. The fossa lunges, 3 meters in a single bound. Claws extended, jaws open. She misses by centimeters. The juvenile's momentum carries it past her, crashing into the main trunk, scrambling upward in panic. The entire troop flees through the canopy, leaping impossible distances between trees. Their alarm calls echoing through the forest. The fossa doesn't pursue. Lemurs in full flight are faster than her in the canopy. Chase would be pointless. She sits on the branch where the juvenile was feeding moments before. Her sides heave. The burst of energy cost her, and she gained nothing. 4 days now without food. The urgency increases. She rests for an hour, conserving energy. Then she begins moving again, this time toward a different resource. Water. It's the dry season. Water sources are becoming scarce. The seasonal stream near the baobab grove is one of the few reliable sources in this territory. Animals must drink, and when they do, they become vulnerable. She's already tried ambushing at dawn. That didn't work. The lemurs were too cautious. But evening is different. Evening brings a different kind of carelessness. Animals that have avoided drinking all day, waiting for safety, sometimes become desperate as darkness approaches. Desperation creates mistakes. She returns to her hiding spot near the stream, the same position she held last night. It didn't work then, but that doesn't mean it won't work now. Predators succeed through repetition, through being in the right place often enough that eventually prey makes an error. She settles in. The shadows lengthen. The diurnal shift prepares to sleep, and the nocturnal shift prepares to wake. And as dusk arrives, movement. Not from the baobab grove, the Verreaux's sifakas that have learned to be too careful, but from deeper in the forest. A different troop, a smaller group, less experienced. 3 individuals, an adult female with a young infant clinging to her chest, and a juvenile male. They approach the stream cautiously but not carefully enough. The female is clearly thirsty. Her infant needs water too. The juvenile is young, maybe 8 months old, still learning proper caution from his mother. They descend from the canopy to the stream bank. The female drinks first, quick laps, head up between gulps, watching for danger. The juvenile waits his turn. The fossa doesn't move. Not yet. Let them drink. Let them relax. Let the juvenile grow confident enough to separate from his mother. The female finishes drinking and retreats a few meters to nurse her infant. The juvenile approaches the water. He's less cautious now, seeing his mother relaxed. He bends to drink. The fossa explodes from cover. 3 bounds. The juvenile hears her and turns to flee, but he started from a standing position on the ground, the worst possible place for a lemur to be. He leaps for a low branch. Her jaws close on his leg, pulling him back down. They hit the ground together. Her teeth find his neck, the killing bite, crushing the cervical vertebrae. It's over in seconds. The juvenile dies almost instantly, without prolonged suffering. The mother screams, a wailing alarm that echoes through the forest, but doesn't approach. Her infant's survival depends on her survival. She can't risk herself trying to save a juvenile who's already dead. She flees into the canopy, still calling, warning every lemur within hearing range that there's a fossa hunting, that the stream is dangerous, that they should stay in the trees. The fossa drags her kill to cover. She's shaking slightly, not from exertion, but from relief. 4 days of hunger ending. 4 days of failure resolved. She begins to feed. She'll eat most of the carcass here, then cache the remainder for tomorrow. Fossas don't waste food. A kill this size will sustain her for 3 days, maybe 4. Enough time to regain her strength, return to peak condition. The forest's equation balances once again. The juvenile's death feeds the fossa. The fossa's survival maintains predation pressure on lemurs. That pressure keeps lemur populations in check, preventing overgrazing, maintaining forest health. It's not cruel, it's not kind. It's ecological function, playing out as it has for millions of years, maintaining the balance that allows both predator and prey to persist. Several kilometers away, the eye continues his nightly routine, unaware of the fossa's success. He's moved to a grove of dead trees, killed by a cyclone 3 years ago, now standing as skeletal monuments slowly being consumed by insects. Dead trees are perfect hunting grounds for eyes. The wood is soft enough to excavate easily, and beetle larvae thrive in the decaying timber. He's found dozens of grubs tonight. His belly is full, and he's in the relaxed state that comes from successful foraging. Then he hears voices, human voices, growing closer. He freezes. Humans are the only predator eyes truly fear, not because humans hunt them for food. Eye meat is considered unclean in most regions, but because of the superstition, the belief that eyes bring death, the voices grow louder. At least 3 people, maybe 4. Flashlights cut through the darkness. They're not hunting eyes specifically, probably searching for cattle that wandered from the village or checking zebu traps. But if they see him, he presses himself flat against the tree trunk, trying to become invisible. His dark fur helps, blending with the bark. His large eyes, so useful for nocturnal vision, are a liability now. They reflect flashlight beams, glowing orange in the darkness. The humans are 50 meters away, 40. Their lights sweep through the dead grove. The eye doesn't move, doesn't breathe. Every instinct screams at him to flee, but movement would guarantee detection. Stillness is his only chance. 30 meters. One of the flashlight beams passes directly over the tree where he's hiding. For a moment, the light illuminates his fur. He closes his eyes, a reflexive action that prevents the telltale reflection. The beam moves on. The humans are talking among themselves, not particularly alert. They're tired, probably been searching for hours. One says something about going home. Another agrees. 20 meters. The group passes below his tree. One human looks up briefly, scanning the canopy, but doesn't see the motionless eye pressed against bark in shadow. They continue past. 15 meters. 10. The voices fade. The flashlight beams disappear into the forest. The eye remains frozen for another 10 minutes, making absolutely certain they're gone. Then, slowly, he begins to breathe normally again. His heart rate decreases. The flood of stress hormones subsides. He's safe, for now. But the encounter reminds all the wildlife in this forest, that humans are always near, always present, always potentially dangerous. Madagascar's animals evolved over millions of years without human predation. They developed defenses against fossas, against harrier hawks, against snakes. But they never developed defenses against human beliefs, human fears, human cultural practices that turn harmless animals into monsters. The eye moves cautiously to a different section of forest, farther from human paths. He'll resume foraging there, in a place where voices are less likely to appear. Evolution can adapt to many things, but it can't adapt fast enough to cultural beliefs that shift faster than genetics can respond. In the baobab grove, the ancient tree hosts another visitor, a pair of kawa birds, relatives of cuckoos, endemic to Madagascar, have discovered a cavity in the tree's massive trunk. The hole, created when a branch fell years ago, has rotted into a perfect nest chamber. The female inspects it carefully, poking her head inside, checking for snakes or other occupants. Finding it empty, she enters and begins arranging the cavity to her satisfaction. The male stands guard outside, watching for predators. They'll nest here for the next 2 months. The baobab will shelter their eggs from rain, shade them from sun, protect them from predators that can't climb its smooth bark. In return, the birds will eat insects that might damage the tree, and their droppings will fertilize the soil around its roots. It's a partnership neither species consciously chose. The birds just search for the best nest site. The tree just stands there, providing structure. But over thousands of years, these casual interactions have become dependencies. The birds need the tree. The tree benefits from the birds. Remove one and the other suffers. As night deepens, other visitors arrive. Moths attracted by the baobab's flowers, massive white blooms that open only at night, releasing a scent like rotting fruit. The moths feed on nectar, inadvertently collecting pollen on their bodies. When they visit the next baobab, they'll transfer that pollen, enabling reproduction. Baobabs and moths have partnered for millions of years in this nightly exchange. The tree provides food. The moths provide fertilization. Both survive because of the other. The fossa, now fed and resting in a tree near her kill, may have climbed this baobab earlier in the night, using its trunk as a highway between forest sections. The suffocers that avoid the stream because of her presence might shelter in this baobab's crown tomorrow. The eye, if he returns to this grove, might forage in the dead wood around the baobab's roots. Everything connects. Every species, every individual, every action ripples outward through the ecosystem in ways too complex to fully map. The baobab stands at the center of this web, not controlling it, just participating, being large enough, old enough, useful enough that other species orient their lives around it. 1,200 years of this, thousands of bird generations, tens of thousands of moth generations, countless lemurs sheltered, countless fossas fed, countless eyes foraging nearby, all of it happening in cycles, in rhythms, in patterns refined by time. And the tree just stands, stores water, flowers when conditions are right, provides what it provides, continues what it continues. That's enough. That's always been enough. Until now. Until the question becomes whether 1,200 years of survival guarantees 1,200 more. Whether the patterns that worked for millennia can withstand the pressures of the 21st century. The baobab doesn't know these questions exist. It just does what it's always done, following instructions written in genes millions of years old, and hopes, if trees can hope, that the forest around it persists long enough for those instructions to matter. Madagascar is losing its forests. This isn't speculation. It's not alarmist rhetoric. It's documented fact, visible from satellite imagery, measurable in hectares per year, undeniable to anyone who compares photographs from 50 years ago to today. When the first humans arrived 2,000 years ago, forests covered roughly 90% of Madagascar. Today, depending on how you define forest, somewhere between 10 and 20% remains. The estimates vary based on methodology, but the direction is consistent, downward. 200,000 hectares are lost every year. That's an area roughly the size of Rhode Island. Every year, year after year. Most of this loss isn't industrial logging, though that plays a role. Most is small-scale clearing by farmers practicing tavy, slash-and-burn agriculture where forest is cut, burned, planted with rice or cassava for a few years, then abandoned when the soil depletes. Tavy isn't sustainable at current population levels. It worked when Madagascar had fewer people and more forest. Cleared land could be left fallow for decades, allowing forest to regenerate. But now, with population pressure, fallow periods shrink. 5 years, 3 years. Sometimes people return to land that hasn't recovered, clearing it again, pushing it further toward permanent degradation. The economics are brutal. Madagascar is one of the world's poorest countries. Average annual income hovers around $500. Most rural families survive on subsistence agriculture. When your children are hungry and there's forest, you can clear for cropland. Conservation becomes a luxury you can't afford. Add to this the charcoal trade. Most Malagasy households cook over charcoal fires. Urban demand is enormous. Trees are cut, slow burned in earthen kilns, converted to charcoal, transported to cities. It provides income for rural families. It also accelerates deforestation at rates hard to calculate. Then there's illegal logging of precious hardwoods. Rosewood and ebony, both endemic to Madagascar, command extraordinary prices on international markets. Criminal networks operate in national parks, bribing officials, harvesting trees worth tens of thousands of dollars each, shipping them to China and Europe where they become luxury furniture. And finally, climate change. Madagascar's weather patterns are shifting. Droughts last longer, cyclones hit harder, rainfall becomes less predictable. The ancient baobabs, which survived for over 1,000 years, are dying in increasing numbers, likely from water stress, though scientists aren't certain. This is the context in which Madagascar's unique species must survive. It's not a nature documentary where animals exist in pristine wilderness. It's a working landscape where humans and wildlife compete for the same resources, and humans usually win. But the story isn't only decline. There are reasons for hope, not naive optimism, but genuine examples of conservation working, of communities choosing protection over exploitation, of species recovering against odds. Start with community-managed reserves. Madagascar has pioneered a model where villages receive legal authority to manage forests in their territories. They decide harvest quotas, establish protected zones, hire their own rangers from community members. Revenue from sustainable forest products, honey, medicinal plants, ecotourism, gets shared among families. It works. Deforestation rates in community-managed areas drop by 60 to 80% compared to unmanaged forests. Not because of outside enforcement, but because people who benefit directly from conservation become its fiercest defenders. Makira Natural Park, one of Madagascar's largest protected areas, employs hundreds of local people as rangers, guides, and forest monitors. They patrol for illegal logging, track lemur populations, maintain trails. Their salaries come from international conservation funding, but the decisions about how to manage the forest come from community councils. The result? Forests that were being rapidly cleared in the 1990s have stabilized. Some are even regenerating. Lemur populations that were crashing have begun slow recoveries. It's not perfect. Illegal logging still occurs. Poaching happens. But the trajectory has changed from catastrophic decline to controlled management. Reforestation efforts are expanding too. Since 2020, over 60 million native trees have been planted across Madagascar. Not eucalyptus or pine, the fast-growing exotics that don't support native wildlife, but endemic species, baobabs, tamarinds, palms, hardwoods. 5,000 farmers participate in these programs, growing seedlings in nurseries, planting them in degraded areas, protecting saplings from cattle and fire. They're paid for their labor, creating economic incentive to restore rather than clear forest. The planted forest won't replace old growth for centuries, but they create corridors between isolated forest fragments, allowing animals to move between populations, maintaining genetic diversity. They prevent erosion, restore water cycles, sequester carbon. Recovery is slow, but it's happening. The sacred forests remain critically important. There are over 200 documented sites across Madagascar where traditional Fadi prohibits forest clearing. Some are tiny, just a few trees around an ancestral tomb. Others span square kilometers. Ecologists studying these sacred forests have found they often contain higher biodiversity than surrounding unprotected areas. Species that disappeared elsewhere persist in these accidental refugees. Some sacred forests are the last remaining habitat for critically endangered species. Modern conservation organizations are learning to work with traditional authorities. Instead of imposing Western park models, where local people are excluded and authority comes from distant government offices, they partner with village elders, respect existing FADI systems, find ways to strengthen traditional protection. One successful approach: documenting which species live in sacred forests, then sharing that information with communities. When elders learn their protected forest shelters, the last population of a particular lemur or frog, the sacred status often strengthens. Pride in being protectors reinforces the FADI. It's delicate work. Outsiders can't dictate belief systems, but they can provide information that communities use to make their own decisions. The II Conservation Program uses similar strategies. Instead of just telling villagers, "Don't kill IIs," educators work with traditional healers and elders to reinterpret the beliefs. Maybe the II isn't causing death. Maybe it's trying to warn you. Maybe showing it respect rather than fear is the proper response. Some communities have embraced this reinterpretation. Villages near II populations have declared them protected, not because outsiders demanded it, but because they chose to see the relationship differently. It doesn't work everywhere. Old beliefs run deep, but where it does work, II populations stabilize, and those stable populations become sources for recolonizing areas where IIs had been eliminated. Perhaps the most encouraging development: species are still being discovered. In the last 20 years, researchers have described over 100 new species of frogs in Madagascar, 50 new reptiles, a dozen new lemurs, even a new carnivore, a mongoose-like creature, photographed by camera traps in an unexplored forest in 2016. Each discovery suggests the same thing: Madagascar's forests still hold secrets. We haven't catalogued everything. We don't know the full extent of what exists, which means there's still time, still forests to protect, still species to save before we even know they're there. Some rediscoveries are equally hopeful. Species thought extinct for decades turn up in remote surveys. A frog not seen since 1995 appears in a forest fragment in 2018. A lemur believed gone reappears in a sacred forest no one had surveyed because access was forbidden. These surprises remind us that absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. A species unseen for years might be functionally extinct, or it might be surviving in a location no scientist has reached yet. The vastness of what we don't know keeps the door open for possibility. The threats remain severe. No one disputes that. Madagascar's biodiversity is in crisis. Nearly all lemur species are threatened or endangered. Habitat loss continues. Climate change accelerates. Political instability disrupts conservation programs. Poverty drives exploitation. But the trajectory isn't predetermined. The future depends on choices being made now, by Malagasy people deciding how to use their land, by communities choosing protection over clearing, by governments enforcing laws against illegal logging, by international organizations funding conservation, by consumers refusing to buy illegal rosewood furniture. Every choice matters. Every protected forest creates refuge. Every community-managed reserve stabilizes populations. Every reforested hectare reconnects fragments. Every sacred grove maintained preserves what exists nowhere else. Madagascar's uniqueness is both its greatest asset and its greatest vulnerability. 90% endemism means 90% of species have nowhere else to go. If habitats here disappear, those species disappear forever. No backup populations exist in other countries. No rescue is possible. But that same uniqueness creates value. Madagascar hosts species and ecosystems found literally nowhere else in the universe. That's worth protecting. That's worth the economic investment, the political will, the daily effort of thousands of people working to preserve what remains. The 1,200-year-old baobab will likely survive another few decades. Maybe another century if the climate doesn't shift too drastically. But whether baobabs planted today will reach 1,200 years depends on whether the forests around them persist, whether the ecosystem remains functional, whether humans choose to protect rather than exploit. The fossa having eaten will survive this week, probably this month. Whether her species survives this century depends on whether enough forest remains to support viable populations, whether prey species persist, whether habitat fragmentation doesn't isolate populations until inbreeding weakens them beyond recovery. The IEI, having avoided humans tonight, will continue his nightly foraging. Whether his species persists depends on whether cultural beliefs shift faster than habitats disappear, whether enough people choose protection over persecution, whether the strange, nocturnal lemur with the skeletal finger finds space to exist in a world increasingly shaped by human fear. These aren't abstract questions. They're immediate, urgent, playing out in real time across Madagascar's remaining forests. As dawn approaches once more, the forest settles into its rhythms. The fossa sleeps, belly full, successful for now. The II returns to his tree hollow, having survived another night despite the presence of humans. The ancient baobab continues its slow metabolism, storing water, preparing for the dry season ahead. To them, this is just another day, another cycle in millions they've experienced or their ancestors experienced. The threats aren't visible from inside the forest. The gradual shrinking of habitat happens too slowly to perceive in a single lifetime. But look from satellite view and the pattern is clear. Forest fragments growing smaller, gaps growing larger, green turning to brown. Unless the pattern changes, unless enough people decide the fragments are worth preserving, unless community management, reforestation, sacred groves, shifting beliefs, and international support combine to stabilize what remains, Madagascar teeters on a knife edge. One direction leads to catastrophic biodiversity loss, species after species disappearing, ecosystems collapsing. The uniqueness that took millions of years to create erased in decades. The other direction leads to stabilization, not pristine restoration, that's probably impossible at this point, but managed coexistence, forest protected enough to maintain populations, species recovering slowly in reserves and community managed areas, ancient trees surviving into their second millennium, lemurs persisting, IIs finding space to exist, fossas maintaining predator-prey balance. Which direction Madagascar goes depends on choices happening right now. In villages deciding whether to expand rice paddies into forest. In governments choosing whether to enforce park boundaries. In communities interpreting traditional beliefs. In consumers deciding what products to buy. Every choice cascades outward, affecting species that exist nowhere else, ecosystems that function in ways found nowhere else, evolutionary experiments that took millions of years to develop. Madagascar didn't just evolve in isolation, it thrived in isolation. The same barrier that trapped species also protected them, allowing unique forms to flourish without competition or invasion. But isolation no longer protects. The ocean barrier that once shielded Madagascar now means species have nowhere to flee when habitats disappear. They're trapped again, but this time not by water, by the limits of their own uniqueness. The next few decades will determine whether that trap becomes a tomb, or whether isolation remains what it's always been, a protected laboratory where evolution's strangest experiments continue. The sun rises, another day begins, the forest breathes, and the question remains unanswered, suspended in the balance between what is and what might be. For now, the baobab stands, the fossa hunts, the II forages, and Madagascar continues doing what it's done for millions of years, surviving against odds, persisting through change, being impossible and irreplaceable all at once. Whether that's enough to ensure its future depends on answers humans haven't provided yet. The night is ending now. The sky lightens from black to deep blue to the pale grey that precedes sunrise. The nocturnal shift winds down. The diurnal shift prepares to wake. In a tree near her cached kill, the fossa sleeps deeply. Her belly is full for the first time in days. Her body is already processing the nutrients, rebuilding muscle, restoring energy reserves. Tomorrow she'll return to the cache, feed again, perhaps hunt if opportunity presents itself. But for now, she rests. The forest around her operates without her participation. Birdsong begins. First the kuas, then the vangas, then the bulbuls. Each species announcing territory, greeting the day, maintaining the social bonds that keep their populations functioning. The fossa's ears twitch at the sounds, but she doesn't wake. She's earned this rest. 4 days of hunger, multiple failed hunts, finally one success. The ancient equation balanced once again. Effort plus patience equals survival. She doesn't know she's part of an endangered species. Doesn't know the forest she hunts in is smaller than it was when her mother hunted here, smaller than when her grandmother hunted before that. She just lives, does what fossas have always done, and trusts that the forest will continue providing what fossas need. Whether that trust is justified depends on choices she has no power to influence. In his tree hollow, the eye has curled into a tight ball, his bushy tail wrapped around his body for warmth. The elongated finger that causes so much human fear is tucked against his chest, just another part of his anatomy, no more significant than his ears or his toes. He doesn't dream. Most animals don't. Or if they do, it's nothing like human dreaming. His brain processes the night's experiences, consolidating memories. Which trees had grubs, which routes were safe, where humans appeared. This information will guide tomorrow night's foraging, helping him avoid danger, find food more efficiently. He survived tonight. That's all that matters in the immediate sense. But survival measured in single nights doesn't guarantee survival measured in generations. His species' future depends on variables beyond his comprehension. Shifting cultural beliefs, habitat preservation, the willingness of humans to see him as something other than an omen of death. He sleeps, unaware of these larger questions, doing what evolution equipped him to do. Forage, survive, occasionally reproduce, pass genes forward into an uncertain future. And in the baobab grove, the ancient tree stands as it has for 1,200 years. The sifakas in its crown sleep soundly now, their caution from dawn's encounter with the fossa replaced by the security of daylight. The koa birds in the trunk cavity tend their eggs. Moths that pollinated the flowers overnight rest in bark crevices, waiting for the next night. The tree doesn't sleep in any sense we'd recognize. It photosynthesizes, transpires, grows, processes so slow they're invisible to any observer watching for less than months. A single cell division in the cambium layer, a millimeter of root extension, a fraction of a degree of trunk expansion. Time moves differently for a tree that has stood for 12 centuries. Human lifetimes are flickers. Animal generations are rapid pulses. Even the slow deforestation happening across Madagascar, catastrophic from a human perspective, might seem merely another fluctuation to something that has witnessed the climate patterns of over 1,000 years. But trees, for all their longevity, can still die. The changing rainfall patterns stress even the most ancient baobabs. Some are collapsing, their water storage systems failing under conditions they never evolved to handle. This tree has survived so far. Whether it survives another century depends on climate trajectories already in motion. Changes too large for any single tree to withstand through adaptation. It stands. It will continue standing as long as physics and biology permit. Beyond that, the future is unwritten. Madagascar should not exist. Not like this. Not with 90% of its species found nowhere else on Earth. The isolation that created this uniqueness also makes it fragile. Every species exists on a knife's edge. There are no backup populations, no refuge in neighboring countries, no way to reintroduce species from captive breeding if wild populations disappear. What's lost here is lost forever. But that same fragility makes Madagascar irreplaceable. Nowhere else on Earth hosts this combination of evolutionary experiments. Nowhere else shows what happens when mammals evolve on an island with no competition. No predators except what evolved alongside them. No reset button for 65 million years. The lemurs that should have gone extinct thrived instead. The mongoose relatives that should have remained small carnivores evolved into cat-like apex predators. The trees that should have died from drought developed water storage strategies that let them survive 9-month dry seasons. Impossibility became reality. The rules everyone else followed didn't apply here. And that's Madagascar's gift to the world. Proof that evolution isn't predictable, that isolation can create rather than constrain, that sometimes the place cut off from everything becomes the most valuable thing of all. The sun breaks the horizon now. Golden light spills across the forest, illuminating the red soil Madagascar is famous for. The baobab's strange silhouettes, the dry, deciduous woodland losing its leaves in preparation for the season ahead. The fossa sleeps on, safe in her tree. The eye remains curled in his hollow, invisible to the day. The ancient baobab catches the first rays of sunlight on its crown, beginning another day of the slow processes that keep it alive. To a visitor seeing this scene, it might look peaceful, timeless, a landscape unchanged for millions of years. But look closer and the changes become visible. The forest edge a little closer than last year. Fewer old trees than a generation ago. More gaps in the canopy where logging occurred. The signs of transformation are subtle but accumulating. Madagascar is changing, has always been changing. Continents drift, species evolve, climates shift. But the current rate of change exceeds anything the island has experienced since humans arrived. The next few decades will determine whether the changes are survivable or catastrophic. The fossa will hunt tonight if she wakes and finds herself hungry. The eye will forage, tapping trees, extracting grubs with his impossible finger. The baobab will continue its slow metabolism, storing water against the dry season. These daily rhythms will continue as long as the forest persists. As long as there are trees to hunt in, trees to forage in, trees to store water and shelter animals and mark time. Close your eyes now. Let your breathing slow. You've traveled 165 million years tonight. Watched continents split apart. Witnessed animals raft across impossible oceans. Seen evolution take paths no one predicted, creating forms no one imagined. You've met a predator that looks like a cat, but isn't. A lemur with a finger that seems impossible, but works perfectly. A tree that stores water like a living reservoir, standing witness to centuries humans can barely comprehend. You've walked through forests where 90% of species exist nowhere else, where isolation became an advantage, where being trapped led to flourishing. Madagascar exists because of luck. Impossible, repeated luck stretched across millions of years. The luck of rafting survivors, the luck of no competition, the luck of just enough rain, just enough forest, just enough time for evolution to experiment without interruption. Whether that luck continues depends not on chance, but on choice. Human choice. Choices about forests and farms, species and survival, preservation and exploitation. The night is over now. The forest continues. The cycles persist. The fossa sleeps, belly full, survival secured for another few days. The eye rests, having avoided humans, having found food, having lived another night. The baobab stands, as it has for 1,200 years, as it might for 1,200 more. Madagascar breathes, ancient, impossible, irreplaceable, and you breathe with it. Connected across thousands of miles, across the barrier of the Indian Ocean, through the simple fact of shared existence on the same planet. Rest now, let the forest hold you. Let the strangeness of this island, the place evolution forgot, the laboratory where impossible things became real, remind you that sometimes isolation creates treasures, that sometimes being cut off from everything leads to becoming something unique, that sometimes the rules can be broken and the result is beautiful, beyond prediction. The sun rises over Madagascar. Another day begins. The forest persists. And in your rest, you carry with you the knowledge of a place that should not exist, but does, against all odds, against expectation, against the usual patterns. A living reminder that evolution doesn't always follow predictable paths, that sometimes the strangest possibilities become the most successful realities. Sleep now, or stay awake. Either way, you've walked with Madagascar tonight. And that island, isolated, unique, impossible, continues its ancient rhythms, whether you're watching or not. The forest breathes, the species persist, the cycles continue. For now.